The entire boarding gate fell silent when Jabari ripped the diamond bracelet from Amara's wrist and flicked it into the airport trash like it meant nothing. His mistress slipped her hand into his as if she'd already won. Everyone waited for Amara to scream. Instead, her eyes settled on the boarding pass in his hand, and she smiled, because one name printed on that ticket had just changed everything. But what he didn't know was that the woman he'd just thrown away was the only person in that airport who understood exactly what was about to happen, and she was going to let him walk right into it. Stay with her, because the woman standing quiet at that gate is about to teach a man that the loudest thing in any room is a woman who has already decided. Let's go back 60 seconds to the moment before the bracelet hit the trash. Gate B12 was crowded that morning, business travelers with their coffee, a mother bouncing a baby on her hip, an old man asleep under his hat. Ordinary people waiting for an ordinary flight. None of them knew they were about to witness one of those moments you never forget. Amara Cole stood near the window with her carry-on at her feet. She was a calm woman, the kind who didn't take up much space. She wore a plain gray coat and flat shoes, and her wedding ring caught the light every time she folded her hands. On her wrist was a diamond bracelet, old, delicate, the stones a little cloudy with age. It had belonged to her mother. It was the only thing she still wore every single day. Jabari came walking up the concourse loud. He was always loud. Tall, sharp-dressed, a man who liked to be seen. And beside him, matching his stride, was a woman Amara had never met but somehow already knew. Long coat, red bottoms, sunglasses pushed up into her hair. She walked like the whole airport had been built just for her to cross. Amara looked at her husband, then at the woman, then back at her husband. She did not look surprised. "Amara," Jabari said, stopping in front of her. He said her name like it tasted bad. "We need to talk, now." "Okay," Amara said, softly. "No, not okay, not soft. I'm done with soft. I'm getting on this plane, and she's coming with me." The woman beside him smiled without opening her mouth. "This is Kenya. You'll be hearing that name a lot from now on. Get used to it." Amara said nothing. Her hands stayed folded, her face stayed still, and that stillness, that was the first thing that made the crowd uneasy. A woman just being told her husband was leaving with another woman, and she didn't blink. Jabari mistook her silence for weakness. Men like him always did. "You want to know the truth?" he said, stepping closer, loud enough that the whole gate could hear. "I bore you. I always have bored you. 15 years I spent with a woman who's got nothing to say, nothing to offer, no fire, no future. You're beige, Amara. That's what you are. You're a beige woman in a beige coat, and I'm tired of pretending that's a life." Somebody near the window whispered, "Oh, that's cruel." Jabari wasn't done. He turned to the people watching, spread his arms wide, and put on a show. "Y'all see this?" he said, loud, grinning. 15 years I carried this woman, paid for everything. And you know what she gave me back? Silence. She'd sit across from me at dinner and stare at the wall like the lights were off inside her head. This right here is what settling looks like, folks. Don't do it. Don't wake up at 40 stuck with the safe choice. A man near the window shook his head and muttered, "Somebody get this dude off the mic." A young woman with headphones pulled one ear free, frowning, the way you do when you realize the thing happening in front of you is worse than the show on your phone. Amara heard all of it, every word, and she gave him nothing to feed on, no tears, no tremble, no crack in her face, which only made him louder. Then Jabari looked down at Amara's wrist, at the bracelet. "And you can stop wearing that," he said, "that cheap little thing. You think it makes you look like somebody? It makes you look like a woman holding on to scraps." Before she could move, he reached out and grabbed it, twisted it hard off her wrist, hard enough that she flinched just once, a small, sharp breath. The clasp snapped. and he turned, took 3 steps to the trash can by the gate and dropped it in, on top of coffee cups and crumpled napkins and somebody's half-eaten breakfast. "There," he said, "now you've got nothing. That's honest, at least." The whole gate went quiet. That bracelet was Amara's mother's. Her mother had died when Amara was 19. She had clasped it on Amara's wrist in a hospital bed and whispered 6 words that Amara had carried every day since. And this man she had given 15 years, had just thrown it in the garbage next to a stranger's trash to make a woman in red bottoms laugh. And Kenya did laugh. People were watching now. A gate agent had frozen mid-step. The mother with the baby had turned all the way around. Everyone was waiting for the explosion, the tears, the screaming, the scene, because that is what is supposed to happen when a man does something like that. The woman falls apart, and everyone gets to feel sorry for her. Amara did not fall apart. She walked, slow and calm, to the trash can. She reached in, past the napkins and the cups, and she lifted her mother's bracelet out with 2 fingers. She wiped it clean on the inside of her coat, and she slipped it into her pocket, safe, like nothing in the world could touch it. Then she turned back to face her husband, and she looked at the boarding pass in his hand, really looked at it, at the name printed across the top in blue letters. And Amara, Cole, smiled. It wasn't a sad smile. It wasn't a broken smile. It was the smile of a woman who has just watched the last piece of a puzzle click into place. A quiet, patient, almost peaceful smile. "Enjoy your flight, Jabari," she said. 2 words, too calm. "I really mean that." And she turned and walked toward the jet bridge, not away from the plane, but toward it, leaving him standing there with his mistress and his cruelty and the strange cold feeling crawling up the back of his neck that he had just missed something big. He didn't know. He would find out at 30,000 feet. Jabari thought he'd just thrown away the last thing she had. He had no idea he'd just handed her the one thing she'd been waiting to use for years. To understand why Amara smiled, you have to understand who she really was. And to understand that, you have to go back, way back, before the gray coat, before the flat shoes, before she made herself small enough to be loved by a small man. Amara didn't come from nothing. Amara came from everything. Her father was a man named Cornelius Ellison, and if you've ever flown across this country, there's a good chance you have sat inside something Cornelius built, because Cornelius Ellison owned an airline. Not a piece of one, all of it. The planes, the gates, the crews, the name painted on the tail. Ellison Airways. Started with 1 cargo plane and a loan and a stubbornness that wouldn't quit, and built into something that carried millions of people every year. Amara grew up on tarmacs. She learned to walk in hangars. When she was 7 years old, her father lifted her up on the wing of his very first plane and told her, "Baby girl, this whole sky is yours one day. You just have to be ready for it." But money like that comes with a cage. Amara watched people smile at her because of her last name. She watched men circle her father's fortune like it was the only interesting thing about the family. And she promised herself, young, that when she loved somebody, they were going to love Amara, not Ellison, just Amara. So when she met Jabari, she lied. A small lie at first. She told him she was just a girl who did the books for a design studio. She wore plain clothes. She drove an old car. She let him believe he was the one with the big future, and she watched his eyes to see if he'd love her anyway. For a while, it looked like he did. Her mother had warned her. On that hospital bed, weak and fading, her mother had clasped the diamond bracelet on Amara's wrist and read the words engraved inside it. 6 words. "The sky remembers her name." And then she'd said, "Amara, marry a man who knows your name when you have nothing, not the ones who show up when you have everything." And she was gone. Amara married Jabari anyway, against her father's wishes. Cornelius had looked at Jabari across a dinner table one time and said just 4 words to his daughter afterward: "That man loves mirrors." Amara didn't listen. She was in love, and when she chose Jabari, her father went quiet, years of quiet. 2 proud people, both waiting for the other to call first. And in the beginning, he did. That's the part that still hurts. There was one night, early on, that Amara never forgot. Their first apartment, no furniture yet, just a mattress on the floor and a lamp with no shade. It was raining and the power had gone out on their whole block. Most men would have complained. Jabari lit every candle they owned, sat her down on that bare mattress, and cooked her eggs on a camp stove in the dark because it was the only thing he knew how to make. He fed her 1 bite at a time and told her, "One day I'm going to give you everything, but if all I ever had was this, you in the dark, eating my sad little eggs, I'd still be the richest man alive." She believed him. She married that man. And for a few years it was true. He'd bring her coffee the way she liked it. He'd fall asleep with his hand on her back. She kept waiting for him to find out she was rich and change, and he never found out, and he didn't change, and she thought that meant she was safe. Then, slowly, he changed anyway, not because of what he learned about her, because of what he wanted for himself. It's never one big thing. It's small things stacked up over years until one day you look up and you don't recognize your own life. It started with the way he talked about money. Never enough. Always somebody else had more. He'd come home from dinner with other couples, angry, comparing, restless. "We should be further than this," he'd say. "I should be further than this." Then came the nights he worked late that didn't feel like work. A second phone he kept face down, a cologne on his collar that she didn't buy him. Amara noticed. Amara noticed everything. She had a way of going very still and watching, the same way her father did in a boardroom right before he made a decision nobody saw coming. She said nothing. She just watched and remembered. And there was one more person in the picture, a woman named Simone. Simone had been Amara's best friend since they were 9 years old, and for just as long, Simone had been quietly keeping score. They'd grown up on the same block, but Amara always seemed to land soft. The studio, the marriage, that expensive old bracelet she never took off. Simone had done the books for that studio for years, watching money pass through her hands that never stayed in them, telling herself she was owed a little of it. Jealousy doesn't announce itself. It just waits for an opportunity and calls itself fair when it finds one. Simone held the passwords. She held the keys. She was the one person in the world Amara trusted without thinking twice. That, it would turn out, was Amara's biggest mistake. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It arrived the way the worst truths always do, quietly at night, when everybody else is asleep. It was 3 weeks before the airport. Jabari was in the shower, his tablet lit up on the nightstand. Amara wasn't snooping. She'd tell you that herself. She just glanced over the way anybody would when a screen lights up in a dark room. And she saw a name, Kenya, and under it a message. "Can't wait for the trip. First class this time, baby. No more sneaking around. Tell her whenever you want. She's got nobody to run to anyway." Amara sat very still on the edge of the bed. She didn't cry, not yet. She picked up the tablet and she read, because if she was going to feel her heart break, she was furniture. Amara read that word 3 times. Her fingers whitened around the edge of the tablet, but she still didn't cry. And then she found the second thing, the thing that broke something deeper than a marriage. She scrolled into the studio's money folder, the accounts Simone kept, and she saw transfers, small ones at first, then bigger. Money moving out of Amara's studio into an account she didn't recognize. She followed it, and the account belonged to Jabari. For a year, her husband had been quietly draining her business, and he couldn't have done it alone. He didn't have the passwords. He didn't have the access. Simone did. Amara opened the message thread between her husband and her best friend, and there it was, in Simone's own words. "Move it slow so she doesn't notice. Girl, trust me, she never checks. She's too busy being sad." And a laughing emoji from the woman who'd held her hand at her mother's funeral. And there was worse. There is always worse when you keep reading. Amara scrolled down and found a message Simone had sent Jabari just a week before. "You should record her crying when you tell her. She's going to fall apart. Might be funny." And Jabari had written back, "LOL, I'ma make it public. Somewhere she can't make a scene. Airport, maybe." A laughing face. Two people planning her worst day like it was entertainment. So the humiliation at the gate had not been a moment of passion. It had been scheduled, planned, chosen for a crowd. He had wanted witnesses. That was the moment. Not the mistress, not even the affair. It was that laughing emoji from Simone that finally did it. Two betrayals in one night, her husband and her oldest friend laughing together about how easy she was to rob, planning the exact scene at the exact gate where 3 weeks later he would throw her mother's bracelet in the trash. Amara set the tablet down, exactly where it had been, face down. She heard the shower still running. And she stood up. She walked to the bathroom door, and in a perfectly normal voice she called out, "Babe, you want tea?" "Nah," Jabari called back, annoyed. "I'm good." "Okay," she said sweetly, and she walked outside onto the back porch into the cold night air, and she took out her phone and she made one call. It rang twice. A deep old voice answered, a voice she hadn't heard in years but would know anywhere. Amara closed her eyes, and she said 3 quiet things into that phone. "It's time." A pause. "You were right, Daddy." A longer pause, and then, so soft the wind almost took it, "Book me on the same flight, and don't tell anyone I'm coming." She hung up. She looked out at the dark yard, and for the first time in a year, Amara Cole was not sad. She was something colder than that. Something patient. Inside, the shower shut off. Jabari started humming. He thought tomorrow was the beginning of everything he wanted. He had no idea his wife had just made a single phone call and rewritten the ending of his entire life. The next 3 weeks, Amara did something Jabari never expected. She did nothing. At least, that's what it looked like. She made his coffee, she folded his shirts, she let him take his calls in the other room, watching him smile at that second phone, and she never said a word. She let him believe he had won, because a man who thinks he has already won stops being careful, and a careless man leaves everything out in the open. But behind the quiet, Amara worked, fast. 3 weeks moved like a montage, late nights at the kitchen table, exporting every transfer Simone thought she'd buried, a folder filling, the affair, the theft, the doctored studio books, all of it, printed and dated. One lunch-hour meeting in downtown office where her father's attorneys took everything she had and did the thing that mattered most. They filed it, before the flight. The fraud case against Jabari and Simone was already sitting with the authorities, signed and stamped, while they still thought no one had noticed a dime. That one decision was why what happened later couldn't be waved off as a jealous wife making a scene. It was already law by the time he boarded. Her father handled the rest with 2 phone calls, a seat for Amara on the same flight, 1 row behind them, and a quiet word to airline security. After 15 years, he wasn't putting his daughter in a metal tube with a man capable of what Jabari was capable of, without people of his own on board. Meanwhile, Jabari got careless. He stopped hiding the second phone, taking calls with Kenya in the living room while his wife sat 10 feet away pretending to read. "She doesn't even care," he told Kenya one night, not bothering to lower his voice. "I could tell her tonight, and she'd just say, 'Okay.'" And Kenya got greedy. That was always what it was with Kenya. Not love, arithmetic. She'd met Jabari at a rooftop party, clocked the watch and the talk, and decided he was a step up. She started texting Amara directly, little knives dressed up as honesty. A photo of Jabari asleep. "He sleeps so good next to me." A message that just said, "He's happier now, let him go." Amara never replied. She just screenshotted each one and dropped it in the folder. The hardest part was Simone, still stopping by the studio every week, smiling, sliding fake numbers across the desk. "You worry too much, girl." Squeezing the same hand she'd held at Amara's mother's funeral. And Amara squeezing back, saying thank you, because a person who feels safe keeps leaving footprints, and a person who feels caught runs. So she let them all feel safe. Every cruel text, every careless brag, every forged number. She wasn't a woman falling apart. She was a woman building a case. They thought they were watching her lose everything. She was getting ready. And the night before the flight, Jabari did the cruelest thing yet, a small thing, the kind that shows you exactly who somebody is. He came home, tossed his bags by the door, and told her, "I'm going on a work trip tomorrow. Few days. Don't wait up." Then he looked at her mother's bracelet on her wrist and smirked, still wearing that old thing. And he walked past her to pack for the woman he was really leaving with. Amara looked at his back, and she touched the bracelet, and she smiled that same quiet smile. Tomorrow, she thought. Back at the airport now, same gate, same morning, but something in the room had started to change around the edges, something the crowd could feel before anyone could name it. After Jabari threw the bracelet in the trash, after Kenya laughed, after Amara lifted it out and smiled at that boarding pass, the air at gate B12 shifted. Small at first, so small that Jabari, drunk on his own cruelty, almost missed it. A gate agent, an older woman with silver in her hair, had been watching the whole thing, and when Amara walked toward the jet bridge, that agent didn't just scan her ticket, she straightened up, her whole posture changed, and she said, in a voice full of respect that came from nowhere, "Right this way, Miss Ellison, we've been expecting you." Miss Ellison. Jabari heard it. He was 3 feet away. He heard the agent call his wife a name that wasn't his, in a tone he had never once heard anyone use with Amara, and a small crease appeared between his brows. He shook it off, probably nothing, but it kept happening. At the front of the plane, a flight attendant took one look at Amara and her eyes went wide, not with confusion, with recognition. "Ma'am," she said, almost breathless, "it's an honor, truly." And she guided Amara to her seat like she was carrying something precious. Jabari watched from his own seat, one row up, and the cold feeling from the gate came crawling back. Why was everyone treating his boring, beige, nobody wife like she was somebody? Kenya noticed it too. Her smirk flickered just for a second. "Who does she think she is?" Kenya muttered. Jabari didn't answer because he didn't know, and Jabari was a man who always needed to know. Then the captain came out of the cockpit, a serious man in a crisp uniform, and he walked down the aisle, past first class, past Jabari, who half lifted his hand, thinking the captain was coming to greet him, and the captain stopped at Amara's row. He gave her a small nod, almost a bow. "Miss Ellison," he said quietly, "we're honored to have you aboard today. Anything you need, you let us know directly." And he walked back to the cockpit, leaving Jabari with his hand still half raised in the air, looking like a fool. Amara said nothing. She just sat with her mother's bracelet back on her wrist where it belonged, looking out the window at the wing of the plane, the same kind of wing her father had once lifted her onto when she was 7 years old. And she waited. Kenya leaned into Jabari, and for the first time all day, her voice wasn't confident. "Baby," she whispered, "why does the captain know your wife's name? Why is she calling her Ellison?" Jabari's jaw tightened. "I don't know," he said. He looked back at Amara. She met his eyes, and she smiled at him, soft, patient, almost kind, the smile of someone who knows the ending of a story you're still in the middle of. And something in Jabari's stomach dropped. The plane pushed back from the gate, the doors sealed, 30,000 feet of nowhere to run stretched out ahead of them. Whatever was coming, they couldn't get off now. They reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt light clicked off. There was no announcement. That's not how it happened. It came at Jabari slow, in pieces, the way the worst realizations always do. It was the small things. The lead flight attendant crouched at Amara's row, speaking to her low and careful, the way people speak to someone who matters. Another attendant set down a drink Amara hadn't ordered. "Just how you like it, Miss Ellison." A senior crew member passed by and touched her shoulder, quiet, familiar, like family. No spotlight, just a steady current of deference running up and down that cabin, and every bit of it flowing toward the plain woman in the gray coat, one row back. Jabari kept catching the name, Miss Ellison, over and over in that same low, respectful voice. And it started to itch at him because he knew that name from somewhere. He'd been holding it in his hand all morning. Slowly, he reached into the seat back pocket and pulled out the boarding pass, and for the first time in 15 years, he actually read the top of it. The name printed there in blue letters, the name he'd been staring at when he threw her bracelet in the trash to make his mistress laugh. Ellison Airways. He looked at the ticket. He looked at the attendant bent low over his wife, calling her Miss Ellison. He looked at the name stitched onto the attendant's collar, the same name. The name on the plane, the name on the wing outside his window, the name on every seat in that cabin, Ellison. His wife's name, her real name, the family she supposedly didn't have, the name he'd sneered at her for not having 3 hours ago at a gate while he threw her dead mother's bracelet in the trash to make his mistress laugh. He had married the owner's daughter. He had spent 15 years calling her nothing, and she owned the sky he was currently flying through. Every insult he'd ever thrown came flying back at him at once. No family, no name, nobody's coming to save you. He'd said that at the gate this morning. He'd said it while a silver-haired agent stood 10 feet away calling this same woman Miss Ellison. He thought about every dinner where she stared at the wall. She hadn't been empty. She'd been holding the biggest secret in the room and choosing, out of love, not to use it against him. He thought about the bracelet in the trash, the words engraved inside he never bothered to read. And underneath the shock came a colder thought, the one that would keep him up at night for years. She had known. At the gate, when she smiled at his boarding pass, she had already known exactly where this plane was going and exactly what was waiting for him on it. She'd let him get on. She'd let him buckle his seatbelt. She'd let him think he'd won, all the way up to 30,000 feet, because up here there was nowhere for him to run. "No," Jabari said. Just that. "No." Amara stepped into the aisle. She wasn't loud. She never got loud. She walked the 2 steps to his row and looked down at him and at Kenya, whose face had gone the color of ash. "Hi, Jabari," she said gently. "You told me I had nobody to run to." She let that sit. "You were half right. I don't run." She reached into her bag and pulled out the plain folder, and she set it on his tray table, and she opened it. "That's the money you took from my studio," she said quietly, sliding the first page toward him. "And that's the account you moved it into. And that," she laid down the next page, "is Simone helping you do it. My best friend since I was 9. You two did a good job laughing about it. I read all of it." Kenya made a small sound. Jabari's mouth opened, but nothing came out. "And this," she laid down the last page, "the honeymoon suite, Mr. and Mrs. Cole, is the trip you booked for her with my money on my father's airline." She almost laughed. "You used the family you said didn't exist to fly your mistress to a honeymoon on the family's own planes." Then she did the thing that made the whole cabin go silent. She reached into her pocket and took out her mother's bracelet. She set it on the tray table right on top of all that paper, and she turned the clasp so the inside faced up, where 6 small engraved words caught the cabin light. "The sky remembers her name." "You threw this in the trash this morning," Amara said. "You called it cheap. You called it scraps." Her voice never rose. "My mother gave me this on the day she died, and these words engraved inside it." She looked around the cabin, at the crew, at the wings, at the name on every seat. "They're not just my mother's words, Jabari. They're the founding words of this airline. My father had them carved into the very first plane he ever built. Then he had them carved into this bracelet for his little girl, so that no matter how small I ever made myself, no matter who tried to throw me away," she looked right at him, "the sky would still remember my name." Silence. Real silence. 30,000 feet of it. Nobody in that cabin moved. A flight attendant had her hand over her mouth. Kenya was staring at the bracelet like it might bite her. Into that silence the cockpit door opened. The captain stepped out and came down the aisle to Amara's row. No show in it, just quiet, and leaned down close to speak to her, though in a cabin that still every word carried. "Miss Ellison, your father's on the ground. He knows everything." A small pause. "He asked me to tell you the aircraft, the crew, every resource of this airline is yours today." The captain's voice dropped, gentle, and he said to tell you, "Welcome home, baby girl." That was the call, 3 weeks ago on a cold back porch. "It's time. You were right, Daddy. Book me on the same flight." This was the ending she had set in motion while Jabari hummed in the shower. Jabari finally understood, every bit of it, all at once, and the color left his face completely. He wasn't on a plane to his new life. He was trapped in a steel tube, 30,000 feet in the air, on his wife's family's airline, surrounded by her father's people, with every crime he'd committed spread out on the tray table in front of him, and nowhere in the world to run. "Amara," he started, his voice cracked. "Baby, listen." "Enjoy your flight, Jabari," she said, the same 2 words from the gate, the same calm. "I told you I meant it." And she turned and walked back to her seat and looked out the window at her father's sky. You'd think a man would go quiet after that. Jabari didn't. Jabari did what small men do when the ground disappears under them. He panicked, loud. He unbuckled his belt and stood up in the aisle. "This is a setup," he shouted at the cabin. "You planned this. You all planned this." He pointed at Amara. "That money is mine. I earned it. I built." "Sir," the lead flight attendant's voice was ice. "Sit down now." He didn't, and 2 large men stood up from the back of the cabin, the security her father had quietly placed on this flight for exactly a moment like this, and started walking forward. Jabari saw them, and he sat down fast. But the damage was done. The whole cabin had watched him beg, then shout, then fold. The proud man was gone. What was left was just a scared man in an expensive coat who'd been caught. And then he turned to Kenya, for comfort, for backup, for the woman he'd blown up his whole life for. Kenya wasn't looking at him. Kenya was already leaning away, pressed against the window, putting as much space between them as a first-class seat allows, because Kenya had done the math the second the captain said the word founder. She hadn't wanted Jabari, she'd wanted a man with a future, and she had just watched that future evaporate at 30,000 feet. "Kenya," he said, "baby, tell them." "I don't know him," Kenya said, loud to the whole cabin. "I barely know this man. He told me he was single. He told me he was rich." She pulled her hand out of reach, as if his touch was contagious. "This is not my problem." And just like that, the woman who'd slipped her hand into his at the gate, as if she'd already won, the woman who'd laughed while he threw a dead mother's bracelet in the trash, dropped him in front of 100 strangers without blinking. The plane landed, and it was not the arrival Jabari had planned. There were people waiting at the gate. Not press, Amara was too private for that, but her father's lawyers with quiet faces, and 2 officers. They weren't reacting to some scene on a plane. The fraud case had been filed days earlier, signed and stamped before Jabari ever boarded. The paperwork was already in motion, and the officers were simply there to finish it. Moving that much money out of somebody else's business isn't just cruel, it's a crime, and Amara had the paper to prove every dollar of it. Jabari was walked off his dream trip in handcuffs made of consequence, not revenge. Amara never touched him. She never had to. He'd built the whole thing himself, brick by brick, lie by lie. She just stopped holding it up for him. Simone found out the same afternoon when the studio locks changed and a lawyer's letter arrived, and every one of her doctored numbers came back to bury her. The best friend since age 9 lost the friend, the job, and her good name in a single day. Abandoned by everybody, exposed by her own handwriting. She called Amara 40 times. Amara never picked up. Some doors, once you laugh behind them, don't open again. And Kenya? Kenya walked off that plane alone, into a life where the man she'd chosen had nothing and the woman she'd mocked had everything. She'd bet on the wrong person. She spent a long time after that telling the story in a way where she came out looking better. Nobody believed her. People had been on that flight. Amara pursued none of them. She didn't post about it. She didn't gloat. She signed the papers her lawyers put in front of her, protected the people who'd stayed loyal, and closed the door on all of them with the same calm she'd carried through the whole thing. And here is where you see the difference between them and her. When it fell apart, Jabari looked for someone to blame. Kenya looked for someone new to hold on to. Simone looked for a story that made her the victim. Every one of them spent their downfall reaching for something. Amara reached for nothing. She didn't need to. That's what real strength looks like. It doesn't grab, it doesn't cling, it doesn't beg the world to see it. It just stands there, quiet, while everything false falls away around it. Word got around, the way it does. In the circles where Jabari used to strut and brag, the story became a warning. The man who threw his wife away and didn't know who she was. People stopped taking his calls. The business partners who used to laugh at his jokes suddenly had meetings they couldn't move. The status he'd chased his whole life, the thing he'd traded a good woman for, turned its back on him the moment he had nothing left to offer it. She simply walked away. And walking away, it turned out, was the loudest thing she ever did. About 4 months after that flight, Jabari tried to come back. Not with a lawyer, he'd run out of those. He came the old way, a letter in his own handwriting delivered to Amara's studio. pages of it. He wrote that he'd made a mistake, that he saw it now, that he'd been chasing the wrong things, and she was the only real thing he ever had. He wrote that he still loved her. He signed it, "Your husband," like the words still belonged to him. He didn't ask about the money he stole. He didn't apologize for the bracelet. He didn't say Kenya's name once. He just wanted back in, now that back in meant something. Amara read the letter one time, standing by the window of her studio in the morning light. And then she did the only thing that fit. She folded it neatly and she mailed it back to him. And inside the envelope with the letter, she put a single photograph, a picture of her mother's bracelet resting on her own wrist, the engraving turned to the camera so he could finally read the 6 words he never bothered to read when he had the chance. The sky remembers her name. No note, nothing else. She didn't need to write a word. He'd spent 15 years telling her she was nothing, and the truth had already answered him better than she ever could. That was the last time Jabari ever reached for her. Some people, when they finally understand what they threw away, spend the rest of their lives standing at the edge of it, looking in. And that is a punishment no court could ever hand down. Some months later, there was a small airfield at the edge of the city where Ellison Airways kept its oldest plane, the very first one, the one Cornelius built with a loan and a stubbornness that wouldn't quit, the one with 6 words carved into the wing. It was early morning. The sky was doing that thing it does right at sunrise, going gold at the edges. And there was Amara. Not in a gray coat, not in flat shoes made for disappearing. She stood at the bottom of the air stairs in the light, and she looked like herself for the first time in 15 years. Beside her stood her father, older now, leaning on a cane, but standing. 2 proud people who'd wasted too many years being quiet with each other, standing in the sun, finally home. On her wrist, catching the morning light, was her mother's diamond bracelet, cleaned, repaired, the clasp fixed, worn openly by a woman who would never again let anybody tell her it was cheap. Cornelius looked at his daughter. "You know," he said, "you could have called me a long time ago." "I know, Daddy." "You didn't need to prove you could stand on your own," he smiled, "but I'm glad I got to watch you do it." Amara laughed, a real laugh, the kind that had been locked up in her for years. She climbed the air stairs, and at the top she paused and turned her wrist so the engraving caught the sun one last time. Then she stepped aboard, not running from anything now, just going somewhere she chose, to a life she built with the people who never sold her out. The same small smile from the gate, but free time, completely free. She never raised her voice, she never begged, she never chased, she just remembered who she was and let the man who forgot fly straight into the truth. Because a cruel man throwing you away was never a verdict on you, it was a confession about him. If this story moved something in you, share it with somebody who forgot what they're worth. And stay close. There's always another soul out there standing quiet in some crowded room, waiting for their moment to stand.